Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of Book Time with Elvis with me, Mark. And I have a short video for you today. Well, I hope it's going to be short for your sakes, I suppose, if I can stop myself rambling. Regarding Maybe Midrash and one of the books I've just finished. And this book that I have just finished is The Liar's Gospel by Naomi Alderman. And I thought I would just talk a little bit about it. Now, this book isn't my normal type of reading, and that's what I love about BookTube, is how it kind of does push you beyond your comfort zones, I suppose. And I really enjoyed taking part in this event, and the book itself turned out to be somewhat of a surprise for me. It is a fiction retelling of the story of Jesus, and specifically that of the last part of his life, I could say. It's a novel set into 4 chapters, and each chapter is told from a different point of view. And the 4 points of view mentioned in the book are that of Miriam, who is Mary, Yehuda from Keriot, which is Judas Iscariot, Caiaphas, who's like the high priest of the temple in Jerusalem, and Bar Avo, who is Barabbas. And Jesus himself is referred to by a more Hebrew sounding name, or is it Aramaic, I'm not sure, Yehoshua. And the book starts basically with a very vivid description of the sacrifice of a lamb to God in the temple in Jerusalem. And while this is going on, the Romans are about to take the city for the first time, the Romans led by Pompey. They are basically breaching the walls. They're coming closer as the priests try to continue with their sacrifices and their appeals to God. The Roman soldiers kill almost everyone they come across. However, the high priest at the time is spared, and he has a conversation with Pompey, and they decide, Pompey decides that these rituals the Jews have are quite ridiculous. It's not going to bother Rome, so they can continue in doing what they want to do. It won't really have any effect. And of course, this decision comes back to haunt throughout the rest of the book, really, because there's all sorts of trouble, and it's always based around Roman policy and how it affects Judaism, really. So in the first chapter, that of Miriam, or Mary, kind of begins with an injured young man called Gidon, who's brought into the village of Nazareth in Galilee. So I'm assuming that's Nazareth in Galilee. And I can't remember if he has his whole hand amputated or just a few fingers, because he's suffering from, I think it's from frostbite, actually. Anyway, as he's starting to recover, he asks to see Miriam, the mother of Yehoshua. And he's seeking out all the friends and family of Yehoshua, the teachers he can find. And Miriam, I'll refer to them by their names in the book, but I've told you kind of who they are anyway. He wants to talk about Yehoshua to Miriam, but she kind of dismisses him, actually, and she describes him both as a traitor, a rabble leader, a liar, and a pretender to the throne. And she adds, "We've tried to forget him here." So that's very surprising. Not probably what you'd expect from certainly the biblical Mary, but remember, this is a fictional novel. Whilst meeting this young man, she kind of recalls the earlier parts of her life and earlier rebellions and things she witnessed, like on a trip with her father to Jerusalem. She recalls her marriage to Joseph, and of course the birth of their first child, Yehoshua. And in no sense at all is it a holy birth, nor is it an immaculate conception. And Yehoshua is in fact the first of many children for the couple, both male and female. She recalls different arguments between herself and her son, and primarily that between her son Yehoshua and his father Joseph. And one day he kind of just storms off, never to return. And she talks about how she had heard he'd become a teacher of sorts, or an itinerant teacher traveling around spreading religious information. and she decides to journey to see him with a couple of the children, and she watches him speak, and I think she's quite impressed, and she wants to see him afterwards. However, I think it's Judas Iscariot actually has been told by Joshua not to admit her, which is quite strange, really. And she says to herself, "Someday all children become strangers to those who gave them birth." She's not there for the crucifixion of her son. She learns all about this really from Gidon, and he keeps pushing her to find out more about Joshua's youth, and she feels pity for him and kind of tells him really what he wants to hear, which is that it was more holy than it really was. As I said, she knows he had died, and she had heard from Gidon that the body had disappeared. As far as she was concerned, it was moved by somebody else. She thought it was Joshua's other siblings, because they told her he'd been reburied elsewhere. She doesn't believe, as Gidon believes, that he's of course risen from the dead. It's a strange relationship between these two. It borders almost on a kind of I don't know, maybe a mutual desire. I mean, there's something sexual there, though nothing actually happens. It does feel that it might. Miriam often refers to herself as an old woman, and he being such a young man, so I don't know if that's a barrier or not, but there's some kind of tension there, definitely, between them. And it's worth pointing out at this point, Miriam is actually a single mother. She's raising the youngest of Joshua's siblings by herself, and that's not because Joseph, as we're told, died. I think in the Bible it mentions he dies earlier because he's so much older. But actually, in this book, he's divorced. He's divorced Miriam, and he's gone to live elsewhere with a new family. She certainly doesn't believe that her son was the Messiah, though she may well believe he was a very naughty boy. Sorry, forgive the Monty Python reference there. And throughout the book, it seems when people talk about Joshua, apart from Gidon and maybe a few others, it just seems like he's a long line in many of itinerant preachers at the time, or healers and so-called holy men that wander the Holy Land, dispensing cures and religious wisdom. There's no suggestion that Joshua is anyone other than the son of Joseph. And as I said, there were no angels, shepherds, or magi at his birth. But this is, as I say, is a fictional retelling, and I think the author's come in for a lot of stick because she talks about a very Jewish Joshua, and of course she herself is Jewish as well. And I mentioned before that many of the reviewers on Goodreads took exception to this fact. And she received a lot of 1 stars for it, which I think is unfair, because if you just take it as a novel, it's pretty good. Anyway, the second point of view chapter is that of Yehuda from Keriot, or to us Judas Iscariot, and it's funny. She follows the line that that Judas is dead after the death of Christ, but he isn't. So it's funny. It's like he's kind of, I don't know if he's wittingly or unwittingly faked his death, but everybody believes he's dead. He, of course, knows he isn't dead, and he's now moved on to a different city where he's living as a kind of guest of this well-to-do Roman merchant, and he then recalls his part in the story of Joshua. Some interesting bits in there regarding his so-called death, which of course he isn't dead. People just believe it. He hears people talking about his death in the market, and actually has a strange sexual encounter with a woman at a temple. I forget which temple it was devoted to. I think she's a Syrian, and there's a kind of, I don't know, what is it, like a frenzied, orgiastic moment where he has sexual intercourse with this woman, and he tells her, did you know you've just fucked a dead man? He seems to take pride in the sense that people think he's dead. His story is very interesting. It might have been probably my favourite of the 4 stories in the 4 points of view in the book. He comes across as a very human character, quite likable in some ways, and the justification for doing what he did kind of makes sense, really, to me. However terrible, that might sound to very religious people, but he takes exception to the fact that Yoshua changes his rhetoric, really, from kind of... he basically, in the book, he becomes too big for his boots, and his head certainly starts to swell, and he starts really believing, and kind of proclaiming that he is, the Son of God, and he thinks he deserves special treatment and all this kind of stuff. So I would say throughout it, Yoshua himself is not a particularly likable character, and the horrible thing is that Judas Iscariot is much more likable and relatable for us. So that's interesting. The next part is that of Caiaphas, and he, as I said, was the high priest of the temple, and for him the whole affair of the crucifixion of Yoshua was a very small part in his story. He barely registers it, really. He just recalls a young man acting mad in the temple, turning everything over, scaring people, destroying people's hard work, and he just feels obviously there's something mentally wrong with him. He obviously conspires with Judas to capture him, but I don't think at any point, certainly within the book, he desires his death. He just wants him brought to account for what he did at the temple, because the temple's made good everybody else's losses. And certainly he doesn't want Yoshua to be killed, and he does try kind of to save him by trying to not push him into saying that he is the Messiah, although of course they ask the question and he doesn't deny it. And of course basically the whole time Yoshua was digging a grave for himself, really, much to the despair of Caiaphas. But as I said, it barely registers with him. He just carries on his life. He's more concerned with the possible infidelities of his own wife. There's a rather odd thing in that because of his position, I don't know whether this is true or whether it's just part of the novel, but as the high priest, he has to have a standby wife. He must be married. So he has like a second marriage, but it only lasts a year. I don't think it's consummated, but it's like a standby wife in case his wife dies before he can perform a ritual, I think, at Yom Kippur, which he has to perform every year, where he goes into the Holy of Holies, and he doesn't know whether he's going to come out alive or not, but for some reason he needs to be married. And so he's always got a standby wife, but it's very interesting, I think, anyway. And the last chapter, that of Barabbas, to us is also quite good. A little bit long, maybe. It paints Barabbas as kind of a street urchin, ragamuffin type character at the beginning, who throws a bit of, throws some stones at the Romans. He gets involved in these little kind of civil unrests. There are a lot of parallels, I would say, between the Roman occupation of Jerusalem and the current situation there, with the heavy force used by Rome against the Jews of Jerusalem, and obviously what we're seeing today with Israel and Palestine. Though it seems that unfortunately, this kind of thing seems to go on all the time, doesn't it? He then falls in with this crowd of kind of criminals come, freedom fighters, and he kind of just rises through the ranks. And he also gets betrayed in a nice parallel story to that of Yehoshua, and he finds himself arrested and brought before Pontius Pilate, in the same way. And Alderman makes out that he's very intelligent, so he kind of tricks Pilate into allowing to give people the choice between him and Yehoshua. He notices there's something different about this young man, whether or not he believes that he's particularly holy or not. It just seems maybe that he just feels a bit sorry for him. Anyway, not surprisingly, the crowd do choose him. choose Baravo over Yershowet. And the way she writes, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, all through his career, Baravo has been giving food to the poor, helping people out with money and looking after them. So, in ready terms, if you're a poor person living in Jerusalem at that time, who's been more beneficial to you? Some bloke who's just speaking about love, or someone who's actually materially helped you. So it's no surprise that Baravo gets released, and he does feel an element of guilt, and he actually, the character wanted to pay for Yeshua to be dispatched quickly during his crucifixion so he didn't suffer, but because some of his friends insult him, he decides against it. And then the book really just goes on that he's kind of occasionally remembers this incident, but then he just goes on with his kind of freedom fighting against Roman occupation, and that's that really. Alderman does kind of give a quick history wrap up at the end, and talks about the destruction completely of the temple and how only the western walls, the last part, left during that time. So there's a lot of violence in it, a lot of sex violence, bad language. It's not at all what you'd expect from a book that's biblical at the heart, but as I say, it is of course a fiction. One thing I'd like to say is I became very interested in Barabbas after reading this book, and I want to learn more about him. And there's not much written about him, but I only realised that the name Barabbas means of the Father. And that's quite strange, I think, because, you could take it as just of the Father, of his own Father, but it could be something bigger. And then when I looked into it, I was reading some information online, they were talking that his first name was also possibly Jesus, and that you had two Jesuses in prison at the same time. You had Jesus Barabbas and then Jesus Christ, or Jesus of Nazareth. And the early biblical scholars thought this would be too confusing, so they removed Barabbas's first name, which would have been the same as the Messiah. And then other scholars apparently have argued that perhaps they were one and the same, and that would be very interesting because he, of course, would be Jesus Barabbas, Jesus of the Father, which I found, extremely ponderous, or something that I want to think about more. But that's it really. As I say, I've talked for much longer than I meant to. I hope I haven't rabbited on and it wasn't too dull. But it's a very interesting book, and it should be treated, yes, as a work of fiction. The title itself says The Liar's Gospel. So, take everything you want in it with a pinch of salt. But as a story, it's good fun. It's interesting. It's quite it's well written, and it holds your attention, I think. And I would really recommend it. I read it on ebook, and I'd be tempted to buy an actual hard copy. So there we go. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to my little review or rundown of this book, and look forward to seeing you all next time. Do take care. All the best. Bye bye.